Okay. Hello again, everyone, and welcome to the Fantasy Slant powered by Pro Football Focus. I'm your host, Michael Moore, and this episode we've got PFF fantasy analyst Jeff Ratcliffe, Mike Taglieri, and Brandon Marianley. So, folks, let's just jump right into some news and notes. I think, it is the off season, so it's not like there's news every single day, but some pretty significant news with Sammy Watkins not ready to return to the field yet. Jeff, let's start with you. Does this affect where you take Sammy Watkins at all yet?
Well, I think if I'm drafting today, then yeah, it's going to affect where I take him. We don't have a timeline, and it's interesting, this sort of series of events that we've seen with Sammy Watkins. We saw him have that foot injury last year, but we also saw him be very electric. Only Allen Robinson had more yards on deep targets than Sammy Watkins, a deep target ball traveling 20-plus yards in the air. But when you hear a player say, well, I'll definitely be back by training camp, and now it's like, well, the staff might not let me out there until the week one opener, this is a little bit of smoke, so I kind of moved him down a little bit. If we're drafting today, I still think he has enough upsides to justify a top-end wide receiver 2 pick, but originally had him as a top 10 guy just on the edge of the top 10. I'm moving him down. I have a little bit of concern here.
Brandon, what about you? Same concern?
Nope.
Okay.
I mean, I don't want to make it that simple, but the guy put up over 1,000 yards, 9 touchdowns in 13 games last season. They are going to be careful with him. That doesn't surprise me at all, actually. I mean, this is the kind of talk you're going to get in June about top players. They don't want to rush him back. Why? Why would they? It's the training camp session. So I feel like, take a chill pill, let everyone else drop him down, and then you swoop him up, especially if you're someone that's going towards the top of the draft. You already have Julio Jones. You already have a wide receiver 1. You're going to be able to get Sammy Watkins in the 2nd or 3rd round now. Do it. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah. Hey, Mike, so who, if Sammy Watkins, if there is a substantial injury there, who stands to gain the most ground on Buffalo's offense if he's out for a while?
I think you got to look at Charles Clay. I don't think Robert Woods is set up for a 100-plus target season. I think the Sammy Watkins injury is real. I think that we're looking at guys. We've seen Julio Jones. We've seen Des Bryant, Julian Edelman. These guys deal with these foot injuries, and it can linger. And do they want to cost their franchise player? No, I don't think they do. And that's why I'm a little bit worried about Watkins. But I think Charles Clay is the only one that I think is even possible to benefit from this, just because he's the only guy that's even talented enough to, I guess, garner targets. The run game, we know that LaShawn McCoy is going to see some targets out of there as long as he's not suspended. But I would say it's Charles Clay.
How about Desmond Lewis, though? 6'4", right? Central Arkansas. The little story nobody's talking about. I don't know. Intriguing guy when you have a size-speed guy like that. Not that he's going to make much of an impact, but I think he is an interesting name for those in deep dynasty leagues.
Well, you heard it here first. Super sleeper right there. So, all right. Moving on. Let's talk about DeAndre Washington out in Oakland. He was getting some first-team snaps this week. All off-season, I don't know that anyone felt comfortable with Latavius Murray. So, Brandon, what do you think about Washington getting some first-team carries there?
Yeah, I mean, that's something you're going to have to watch. This is why we have a preseason. This is why we have training camp. And this is also why June drafts are difficult, because we just don't know. I mean, I think that last year we also thought Latavius Murray was going to be so-so. And sometimes they stick with these guys even if we think it's crazy. I mean, there are a lot of fantasy options like that. Jeremy Hill just tumbling into the end zone. We don't know how it happens, but it does. There's a possibility that Latavius Murray does it still. I think that I don't like overcommitting. And if you got Amir Abdullah last season in the 2nd round, you felt really glum and then, or glib, I should say, and then glum, right? I guess that would be the way that it went. So, I mean, just keep your eye on it, but I'm not going all in. But certainly late rounds, why not?
So, Jeff, where do you put Washington at this point as far as redraft leagues go?
Well, first, I'm all about undercommitting, so I do whatever that means. But yeah, hey, you look at Murray and you look at the situation where there's the smoke, there tends to be the fire. And they showed that. The Raiders showed it. They went out and they drafted this kid who is really intriguing. He's got a skill set that is reminiscent of Maurice Jones-Drew. Comes from that spread offense in Texas Tech, though. So sometimes it's a bit of a tougher transition, especially when it comes to wide receivers and quarterbacks. Sometimes maybe a little bit easier for the running back position. But one thing we always have to be cautious of is not overvaluing the numbers from that sort of a college offense. They tend to be more prolific. Kenneth Dixon, another kid this year coming out of a spread offense, so something to consider there. But redraft-wise, I still think you have to look at him as back-end RB4, maybe borderline top 50 running back at this point, but with upside, somebody who could sneak in there behind an awesome offensive line, by the way. Of course, Dallas is going to take the cake this year, but that Raiders offensive line can get the job done, so anybody running behind it is going to be productive. The offense taking a step in the right direction. So you're looking at guys you want to take a late-round flyer on. Washington is one of those guys for me, and I actually just scooped him up in the second round of the SiriusXM Dynasty League. 16-teamer got him in the mid-second round and was quite happy with that.
So, Mike, going back to Murray, though, as of today, where do you put him in redraft leagues? Is he still, a high-end running back 2 for you? I mean, where are you taking him?
He's the middle of the pack RB2 for me. I think a lot of people tend to overrate rookies. Even when you look at, outside of somebody like Todd Gurley last year, a lot of rookies were disappointing. And it kind of happens every single year. You want to believe in that training camp darling that comes along. I got DeAndre Washington actually in the third round of a rookie draft. It was right after the draft took place, so now you're going to see him start to ramp up with these training camp blurbs coming out about him. Now, I know a lot of people were worried about Murray's role going into the season. Oakland was looking for a running back. I think, personally, this is best-case scenario. DeAndre Washington, Jeff, I like your comparison to the Maurice Jones-Drew, but I also believe this guy's going to have to catch up with the speed of the NFL. It goes with any rookie. So Latavius Murray, I think his workload is safe. I think he's going to get another crack at this, and I think that he delivers on, even if he's not spectacular, on volume alone, I call him a low-end RB2.
Okay. All right, and then last little bit of news and note for this week. Calvin Johnson, again, having to reiterate, he really, really, really is retired, and nobody should be expecting him back. Brandon, for you, who stands to gain the most out of his still retirement phase?
I hate being the Eric Ebron apologist, but I think it has to happen here. You know what? Actually, last season he started off strong, and then he got hurt, and then he stumbled back in. And this is exactly why I'm saying with Sammy Watkins, I don't want them to rush him back from injury. Keep him out. Get him healthy. And I feel the same way about Eric Ebron. I thought they rushed him out there. They were really desperate. They had this whole coaching debacle. It was nutty. And he never really got back that magic, right? He only scored 5 touchdowns on the total season, 537 yards, not good. Even though it's 14 games, but still missing 2, and it's not good enough for our fantasy purposes. But I actually think that they're going to start to use him in the red zone. That's what he's supposed to be, is this big red zone threat, right? He's supposed to be this big tight end. Maybe year 3, especially as a tight end, I think this is it.
Interesting fact about Ebron, 1 fewer target than Tyler Eifert last year. Tyler Eifert has 66 targets, Eric Ebron 65 targets. And Brandon, I think you make a good point here. Tight ends, sometimes we don't give these guys the benefit of the doubt. It's one of the toughest positions to transition into the NFL. So we look at this kid, athletic freak coming into the league, had a lot to learn. Another guy who we saw this, and you go way back to the Hard Knocks. Boy, was that the Hard Knocks with T.O. running on the beach? How long ago was that? But that was when Martellus Bennett was a rookie. And remember, Jason Garrett's brother sitting there talking to Martellus, okay, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this. Martellus Bennett entered the league, a very athletic kid, but it took a long time for that to really develop. Of course, playing behind Jason Witten doesn't hurt the cause, learning from a vet like that. But Ebron, in this situation, I agree. He's a guy who I think is a sneaky TE2 who could really take a step forward, especially with the way that Matthew Stafford riffed with Jim Bob Cooter's offense. I think that's a good call that he's going to be part of picking up the slack with Calvin Johnson retired.
Well, and Mike, one question I have that I'm very curious about, what does this do for Matt Stafford's value? Meaning, Johnson's retired. You've got, obviously, Marvin Jones, who won't be Calvin Johnson, but he'll try. So where does that put Stafford for you this year?
I'm worried about Stafford. I know there's a lot of people still pimping him out as a low-end QB1, high-end QB2, but I'm not even close to that with Stafford. Honestly, he's teetering on quarterback 2 numbers for me. Personally, if you look at Matthew Stafford's splits without Calvin Johnson, he's just not very good. I don't think Matt Stafford is any better than Jay Cutler as an actual quarterback. So when you take away one of the greatest generational wide receivers, Calvin Johnson, you're going to see that effect. Now, Eric Ebron, yeah, the thing I worry about with him is when Jim Bob Cooter took over, that's when Ebron's targets dipped. He didn't target him very often. And then you had Golden Tate, who was seeing his average depth of target once Jim Bob Cooter took over was 3.8 yards. So Golden Tate's not going to take over Calvin Johnson's role. They don't have that big guy. I know Marvin Jones, I'm okay with him as a possession, like a number 2 receiver in an offense. But then Golden Tate's the same guy. So I'm not saying they're the same type of receiver, but they're both complementary receivers. I don't see either of them being the number 1. So, me personally, I am staying away from Matthew Stafford altogether.
Brandon, what about you? Is that fair?
I think it's fair, but Matthew Stafford is one of those people that always has those big games against bad defenses. He is luckily someone that you can predict. So if you are streaming a quarterback, he's kind of one of those guys. He's kind of the anti-Ryan Tannehill, right? Ryan Tannehill goes up against Baltimore. He's supposed to give up the absolute most points to quarterbacks, and the guy gets like 60 yards in the entire game. That drives me crazy. But I feel like Matthew Stafford's one of those guys I know exactly what he's going to do every game. Is he on my team? Can I play him? Can I not? He's very predictable. I mean, Thanksgiving, that was just waiting for the big fantasy boom. I mean, we all knew it was coming. So, I don't know. I feel like he's kind of one of those guys that I'm only using in certain circumstances. And 2 quarterback leagues, sure, why not?
Okay. Very good. Well, let's just jump right into the PFF Fantasy 101. That was our complete list of the top 101 fantasy players for this year. So we're going to look at those players and give a overvalued, undervalued, and just general opinion on that. So without further ado, tied at 100, you've got Theo Riddick and Isaiah Crowell, followed by Justin Forsett, Eli Manning, Steve Smith, Gary Barnidge, Charles Sims, Chris Ivory, Julius Thomas, Blake Bortles, and Zach Ertz. So Mike, let's start with you. Which of those guys probably has the most potential to be successful this year?
I know it's tough to say, and I know, Brandon, you're on this one with me, is Isaiah Crowell. I believe that he's being very undervalued early in drafts, and I'm not even a big fan of Isaiah Crowell as a talent. I'm talking about him when you have the offense coming to town as it is with Hugh Jackson. You know how they're going to be used. You can see it play out already in front of you. You see the Jeremy Hill, you see the Gio Bernard in these guys where Crowell is going to be that Jeremy Hill. Now, is that a great talent? Is Crowell as awful as he was last year? That remains to be seen. But they haven't added anybody behind Crowell and Duke Johnson, where Hugh Jackson's offenses have been in the top 7 for attempts in each of his last 4 coach teams. So therefore, you're looking at massive attempts, especially with the question at quarterback that they have. So Isaiah Crowell, regardless of talent level, the opportunity is going to be him and Duke Johnson. So I actually think Crowell could be a little higher on this list.
Yeah, and actually, I tend to agree. I did a story on that as well because I love Hugh. Hugh loves to run the ball, and while neither one of those guys is going to get 300 carries, obviously, I mean, they're going to get a lot between them. I mean, probably 150 a piece at least. So, yeah, I think I'd agree. If you want a decent RB2 option every week, I think you can go with that.
But I got a quick question.
Yeah.
Who's the all-time leading rusher at the University of Miami?
Is it Isaiah Crowell?
It would be one
Duke
Johnson.
There we go.
Yeah, a lot of people overlook this. This guy. No, I'm not talking about at some Division II school, some Jeff Janis school or something like that. This guy is the number 1, the all-time leading rusher at the U. Now, this guy can actually run between the tackles. They didn't use him that way last year, but I don't know if they necessarily really knew what they were doing on offense last year. This year, he knows what he's doing, and we've already heard some rave reviews. So I have a little bit of concern that Crowell doesn't kind of slip back into more of a complementary role for Duke Johnson, who does have a legit 3-down skill set. So I'm maybe a little bit lower. He's a guy who I'm probably not going to have on too many teams this year.
Okay. Brandon, what about you? Who's on this list in the 90th range that shouldn't be?
Well, I mean, Theo Riddick and Danny Woodhead tied for the most receptions out of all running backs, and here he is at the end of the bottom of the barrel. And so many people play in PPR leagues now, and I get it. I think Amir Abdullah is going to come forward, and obviously his rookie season was not what he dreamed of, or any of his fantasy believers dreamed of, for sure. I think it's going to be better. Also, I'm a little bit of a Zach Zenner believer in dynasty leagues. I know he's not going to be this year, but still, I'm still with it. I'm still with it. I feel like he's a spoiler. He's just someone you have to watch, is all I'm saying. But more than that, Theo Riddick has proven himself. He has reception skills. And what do we play? Points per reception. So, for him to be the last guy on the list is a little bit surprising. But I remember last year, when people would call it a Sirius XM, they would always ask Theo Riddick questions, and it always felt difficult to say, yeah, start Theo Riddick. But I have a feeling I'm going to be doing the same thing this year. Like, sorry, yeah, you should start Theo Riddick.
Well, yeah, and I think the important thing is it's not like Detroit brought anyone to challenge him for that role this year. I mean, it's still his. So, all right, moving on. At number 90, Torrey Smith, followed by Marvin Jones, Dorial Green-Beckham, Carson Palmer, Ladarius Green, Tom Brady, Laquan Treadwell, Amir Abdullah, Coby Fleener, and Tyler Lockett. So, Jeff, for you, who's on that list in the 80th range that should not be?
That should not be. Let's see. That's a little tricky for me. I wanted to talk about Coby Fleener. I think Tyler Lockett's maybe a little bit too high. I look at him. I look at somebody like Chris Ivory in the last round, too. Chris Ivory is not going to get anywhere near the touches that he got last year. But Tyler Lockett, hey, I love the upside. I love the special teams ability, but let's be clear that this offense is going to go back to more of that run-heavy approach that we saw to the Seahawks over the last 3 years. We talk about Hugh Jackson running the ball a lot. Seattle runs the ball a ton, and it's not going to be that offense more out of necessity because nothing else would work because the offensive line was that bad. I mean, they made some attempt to upgrade that offensive line, especially in the draft this year. For me, this is a little too high for Tyler Lockett, especially, Brandon, if we're playing in PPR. Tyler Lockett's just not going to be that much of an asset there. So 81 feels high for me. I'd much rather have Torrey Smith at 90 than Tyler Lockett at 81.
Mike, what about you? Who's on this list that maybe that looks right that they're in this 80th range?
Oh, I mean, Jeff said it. Torrey Smith should be a lot higher than he is, in my opinion. I want to say that I had Torrey Smith in my top 60 players for this year. But going outside of somebody else, even outside of that, I'd like to talk about Coby Fleener. He's my lock for top 6 tight end production this year, and I know that's going out there on a limb, I guess. But honestly, when it comes, Jeff, we talked about it, Jeff. When it comes to tight ends, it's the most difficult position to predict. All right, and I just wrapped up an article actually that I spoke about this and how opportunity is key for tight ends, maybe more so than even running backs. The magic number of 82. If you see 82 targets as a tight end, you're almost locked into top 12 production. Now, looking through the numbers with Drew Brees, rather than going through and through all this, Drew Brees is going to target Coby Fleener a minimum of 100 times. So you're not even talking about 100 targets from Brian Griese or something like that. You're talking about Drew Brees. You're getting these targets from. Coby Fleener is a massive, massive guy, athletic, and that's exactly what Drew Brees looks for in the red zone. I like Coby Fleener. I know a lot of people are expecting Mike Thomas to step into that Marcus Colston role. I think it goes to Fleener, the veteran. I think it's going to take Thomas a little bit to pick up on this offense. I like Fleener a lot, and Drew Brees has said nothing but good things since he came to town.
I like Brian Griese references. Ben Watson, 101 targets last year, and look what he did, and he's just a pedestrian talent. Fleener's he's really exciting with his athleticism. Yes, okay. Sometimes he drops balls. So do a lot of players. He's going to see plenty of targets, and I agree with you 100% there, Mike.
Well, yeah, and I actually wrote about that too, Mike. You had Ben Watson, who was second on the team with 100 targets. Marcus Colston had 67 himself, so Mike Thomas could still get Marcus Colston's targets. Fleener could get Watson's, and Willie Steed and Brandon Cooks are doing the exact same thing they are last year. So, yeah, there's plenty of targets to go around there. That's for sure. All right, so moving on. At 80, we've got Michael Crabtree. 78, we have a tie, Kevin White and T.J. Yeldon. Melvin Gordon at 77, Danny Woodhead, Deshaun Jackson, Matt Jones, Corey Coleman, Alan Hearns, and Jeremy Langford at 71, who I'm guessing somebody will get to that one soon. But Brandon, you first. Who on the 70th list looks good to you?
Looks good. Well, I think this is kind of where we get to the who do I draft here section. In every draft, these are actually the players that I get to, and I go, I don't know. Again, Danny Woodhead receptions. I don't know how you deny that. But listen. I was born and raised in Colorado, and so I am familiar with the John Fox conservative mantra of life, and I happen to believe that Jeremy Langford's ADP has now dropped to the point where he's completely draftable. He will get used. He has the best chance here to outdo his ADP, and I know the skills are not there. I know all the stats are not there. I've read all of our great articles, and I agree with them. But he's so low now. I think I got him in like the 7th round the other day, and we're playing with analysts and things like that, but I think I got him in 7th or 8th round. I was like, this guy is going to at least be the bell cow at the beginning of the season, and then I can drop him and do whatever. I'm very active on the waiver wire list, especially with running backs, so that doesn't scare me. I don't think he's going to go with a rookie guy up front. I think that is a huge exaggeration, and especially John Fox and rookies. I mean, remember Cody Latimer? No, you don't.
Who?
No, you don't. Exactly, because he's a rookie for John Fox, and it just blew his career. And then Peyton Manning didn't like him, so sophomore season he didn't do well either. But my point is, I think that he's actually dropped to the point where if you can get a bell cow in the 7th round, it is what it is.
Well, yeah, even a starter, to get a starter in the 7th round is tremendous value. And like you said, even for the first month or two, you could ride that wave for, as long as you need to.
When we took our stand, he was going in like the 3rd round or the 2nd round. So I'm telling you, that day is gone. And that did deserve some warning signs, like stop doing this, you're crazy. But in the 7th round, I don't know. I think that's okay.
I agree with Brandon here. I'm going to chime in just because Jeremy Langford, you're right. It was just 2 months ago maybe, Jeremy Langford was being drafted as a top 13 running back. I was laughing at it. There was no way Jeremy Langford should have been drafted ahead of guys like Carlos Hyde. But now we're at the point where I agree with you 100%. His ADP has dropped to the point where he's definitely draftable because Jordan Howard, he's still a rookie and he doesn't catch the ball. I don't think he's got good hands. So therefore, not to say Jeremy Langford does either, because didn't he lead all running backs in drops last year? I believe that was.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he didn't miss any tackles. I get all that. Those are all true things. I don't want to act like our stats matter, and it does matter. It just has taken him so low that if you're drafting today, you get a value.
Well, let's look at this ADP though really quickly. So here's the guys. He's at, if you take the consensus, he's at 22 among running backs. Going right before him, so at 20, it's Jeremy Hill, then Matt Jones, then Langford, then Ajayi, then Matthews, and then Stewart right after that. Would you say Jeremy Langford is the best one out of that bunch?
No, but I think he's the bottom of that bunch, and I can get him lower than that. I can get him after Charles Sims in some drafts. And I love Charles Sims, don't get me wrong, but I think that maybe it's just because we're drafting with analysts, but I'm able to get him even lower than that by a long shot.
Yeah, I think Langford belongs in like the Melvin Gordon category, right around there. That's I think the area that Langford has. But honestly, I don't know, Jeff. The ADP data seems to be a little bit behind because I'm with Brandon here. I've been seeing him drop. I've been doing so many drafts, it's ridiculous. But Jeremy Langford is dropping. I got him as my RB3 the other day, and I went wide receiver heavy. It was kind of crazy to see him drop as far as he did.
Yeah, it's tough though. We're in this sort of cocoon sometimes where everybody's so hyper informed, and for people who are listening to this right now, maybe you are in a draft where somebody hasn't caught up, and I call it the red zone syndrome. So people see Jeremy Hill, Jeremy Langford.
Close enough.
Yeah, right.
Get that later. Yeah, same skill set.
Same syndrome. They see him make a play on red zone, and this guy's awesome. Meanwhile, 3.6 yards per carry. We haven't even mentioned that he was one of the worst pass blocking running backs in the NFL. That's the concern. Foxy might not like rookies, but what if Langford is that bad? Then what's the scenario here? Is Langford even on the field? And we've seen. Hey, you mentioned Cody Latimer. Cody Latimer was that bad that they couldn't put him on the field. So he's a smart coach. He knows what he's doing. And last year it was sort of necessity. We'll see this year, but when we go through those names, I think I agree with you. If you can get, everybody has a breaking point in terms of value. So if you can get him in that range where you're talking T.J. Yeldon, then you get down to Amir Abdullah, that sort of range, Charles Sims, I think that's fine. But for me, typically, I've noticed that that's where I'm looking at quarterbacks in drafts. I'm looking at Drew Brees in the 7th round of a 12-teamer, Ben Roethlisberger in the 8th round of a 12-teamer, and that's right where it seems like Jeremy Langford is going off the board in some of these industry drafts right now.
Well, and Jeff, one more name you brought up, Matt Jones, because I think, I don't know if Matt Jones and Jeremy Langford are in the exact same situation, but it's similar where, hey, they've sort of inherited the starting job, but, in a vacuum, they don't seem that good. So, where does that put Matt Jones? Is he sort of lumped in there with Langford? Is he, viewed a little higher, a little lower?
Well, the one difference is that, we hear this today, Keith Marshall might not make the team. So, the Washington beat is not including Keith Marshall on the 53. So he's practice squad material, and that tells me that they're more confident perhaps with Matt Jones than maybe the general public realizes. And what is interesting about Matt Jones, okay, we know that Chris Thompson is there, but Matt Jones does have a 3-down skill set. If he gets 200-plus touches, last year Rashad Jennings didn't even hit the 200-touch plateau, and he was still a top 20 fantasy running back. And Matt Jones going outside of the top 20 right now, just outside. I don't mind that. I would definitely lean more towards Jones, and I know this is like I need to take a shower after saying all this, but I like Jones a little bit more than Langford, and I think but then Jones or Ajayi, I'm probably going more towards Ajayi. I still have this sort of unhealthy obsession with his 32 touchdowns that he scored in his last year at Boise State. But, they're all in that weird tier, though, that sort of big, huge question mark tier.
There are a lot of tweeners, that's for sure.
Tweeners.
All right, moving on. 70, Giovanni Bernard. 69, Duke Johnson, the previously mentioned. 68, Delaney Walker. 66, we have a tie with Frank Gore and Ben Roethlisberger. Larry Fitzgerald, Drew Brees, Jeremy Hill, John Brown, and Jordan Matthews. So, Mike, out of those guys, who should not be there?
Oh, who should not be there? Honestly, Larry Fitzgerald. I'm going to go with Fitzgerald. I think that it's a nostalgia thing. A lot of people are stuck on Larry Fitzgerald because he's been there for a long time. You may have started playing fantasy football when this guy was in his prime, and you've seen a little bit of flash last year with Carson Palmer at the start of the season. But as the season went on, you kind of seen him decline in terms of stats and his production. I know he had the little glimpse in the playoffs, and that's what people are going to hang their hat on. That's why he's being drafted as a top 30 wide receiver again. But he's going into his age 33 season. Michael Floyd, John Brown are both in the prime of their careers. Michael Floyd about to be a free agent, maybe. I mean, who knows where this is going to go, but when you look at the targets and you have to distribute only so many targets among those wide receivers, Larry Fitzgerald's a better blocker than he is a receiver, I think, at this point in his career, and I think they're going to use him as that. David Johnson's going to eat up some of those shorter routes that he used to run. I just believe that the talent is so good around him that it's going to bring him down into that wide receiver 35, wide receiver 40 range this year.
Brandon, what about you? You've got another Arizona receiver there, John Brown at 62. Is that about right?
I'm actually not a huge fan. I was going to say that I think John Brown should be lower. Listen, Larry Fitzgerald was a top 10 guy in standard, top 7 in PPR last year. I think Carson Palmer really likes him. I think he's going to be the dump-off guy. And John Brown only has 65 receptions, which was low. I think that he's great, but I think he benefited from Michael Floyd's injuries last year, so he was able to capitalize on that as far as fantasy production is concerned. If that doesn't happen again, I'm a little worried. I think the workload is not large enough for me to draft him this early. I pretty much like everything about the Arizona Cardinals offense, so I do want to be clear about that. To me, this is kind of like splitting hairs. I think all 3 of them are very good, but I also understand math and opportunities, and probably not all 3 will end up top 10 guys. So if I have to make a judgment call, I think John Brown's odd man out. He just seems a little more gadget to me than I'm comfortable with it at that point in the draft.
Well, Jeff, a question for you. I mean, we're all anticipating David Johnson to get a bigger workload from the get-go this year. So how is that going to affect the Arizona receivers this year?
I don't think it affects them at all because they don't have a tight end. They don't throw to the tight end, so we'll still see the same distribution that we saw to the wide receivers last year. The question is, does Fitzgerald ultimately see that lion's share of targets, or do we see Brown and Floyd start to creep up closer to them? Both of those guys right around the 100-target range last year. I think that does happen. I tend to agree a little bit with Mike here that, and you never want to hear a player, okay, it's fine in February to say I'm going to retire or I'm thinking about retiring. Fitzgerald said that in April, so that's a weird time to say something like that. I think that's kind of interesting. And when you look at this list, though, the name that stands out to me, and it's not even close, is Jordan Matthews. I can't draft this guy until I know he can play on the outside. This is not a Chip Kelly offense where we're going to be running 3 wide receiver sets 85-90% of the time. They're going to run a lot fewer sets, and if he can't play on the outside, and he didn't show that he could in off-season activities, he's not going to be on the field. He's going to play 65% of the snaps. That means Ruben Randall potentially is on the field along with Nelson Aguilar if everything works out with him, but that's another topic for another time. So Jordan Matthews really stands out. Danger, danger, danger. Real quick before we move forward, just wanted to say, you're listening to the show, you like what we do, you can help us in continuing to do that by stopping by ProFootballFocus.com. Our draft guide is now available. It's light years ahead of anything we've done before, and I know that's a football trope, light years ahead, but it is light years ahead of anything we've done before. $5.99 gets you a digital copy that we do update throughout the course of the off season. Of course, why not just go for everything, though? You can do an all-access package that will get you access to Fantasy Gold, access to PFF player grades, access to the draft guide, and access to our new DFS product, which will actually be a monthly product, but you don't have to worry about that for one nice fee. Head over to the site or just pick up Fantasy Gold. We have some of the best tools in the market, and everything is new and improved this year. We made a nice investment into some state-of-the-art, cutting-edge tools that are going to help you dominate your drafts. So definitely stop by Pro Football Focus and subscribe to all the great products we offer.
Yeah, so stop listening to this and go to the site and sign up.
Right now, run.
You can
all
push pause.
We are quickly running out of time, so we will speed this up a tad. Number 60, Dante Moncrief, Emmanuel Sanders, DeMarco Murray, Devontae Parker, Travis Kelce, Jonathan Stewart, Jay Ajayi, Tyler Eifert, Ryan Matthews, Russell Wilson, Doug Baldwin, Eric Decker, Michael Floyd, Andrew Luck, Deion Lewis. So, Mike, out of those players, and we are getting to the cream of the crop slowly but surely, who maybe is too low for you on this list right now?
Too low for me on this list right now. Dante Moncrief. He's definitely one. I'm now looking at it. I see he's the number 29 receiver on this list, and that's just way too low. Dante Moncrief, when looking at his numbers with Andrew Luck, he's a top 18 wide receiver, and that was last year with Andrew Luck on, he just wasn't playing Andrew Luck type football. He's a lot better than he showed last year. A lot of people are calling to just throw out last year altogether and just say, let's look at Andrew Luck before then. When you look at Dante Moncrief, don't let the uniform fool you. He doesn't look like a huge receiver, but he's 6'2", over 200 pounds. The guy has the traits of a number one, whereas T.Y. Hilton's got that field stretcher, the addition to the offense. And then you look at Philip Dorsett. These are speed guys. Dante Moncrief could be that possession receiver in Andrew Luck's offense, and he's a premier route runner. He's a game breaker. I think he has a chance to finish as a top 15 wide receiver this year.
Jeff, you look surprised.
It's a bold take. I like Moncrief a lot. Top 15 is very bold. We need Luck to show that he actually is a good quarterback. And I know a lot of people are already, giving him that gold jacket in Canton. But let's not forget that we at PFF, we said there are some flaws to this guy's game, and everybody said, you guys are crazy. You're nuts. Trashing us on the Twitter machine. And then look what happened last year. So he has to take a few steps forward. And I'm not saying that he's not going to be a great quarterback throughout the course of his career, but he showed a lot of flaws last year, and really maybe some of it is just maturing with the game. Some of these players, it does take a long time, especially at quarterback, but I like the call. I think it's a bold one, and it wouldn't surprise me if it happens. It's just, it's one of those hot takes. But for me, Tyler Eifert, 66 targets, 13 touchdowns. That's not sustainable production, folks, and his targets could uptick a little bit especially if he gets a full season in. If he gets a full season
Yeah.
in, that's dangerous. I'd much rather take my chances with somebody like Kobe Fleener. I guess it's the fear of the appeal of the unknown and the fear of the known here. But Tyler Eifert, 53, number 4 tight end on this list, too high.
All right. Let's keep this list moving along. Golden Tate at a tie for 44 with Latavius Murray. Matt Forte, Thomas Rawls, Kelvin Benjamin, Jarvis Landry, Greg Olson, Jeremy Maclin, Aaron Rodgers, and Cam Newton. So, Brandon, for you, who is too low on this part of the list?
If he can get healthy, Thomas Rawls is going to be the main running back in Seattle. And if they're telling us the truth, if they were really going back to that run game, I'm getting him low. I'm getting him really low, as in he is not even in people's thoughts. And I understand. I think Deion Lewis is the same thing, right? It's like both of them are big risks because we don't know what's going on with their injuries. Now, there's no timetable for his return, but they've been lumping him with Jimmy Graham every time they do a press conference, and obviously there's no timetable for Jimmy Graham because he's seriously injured with that patellar tendon issue. So I'm not as afraid of that as other people. So I think you can keep getting him as a bargain. So I'm just saying highlight him, look at where he's going, and get him because he could be a serious workhorse when he gets back.
So you'd be comfortable with him as your RB1 for this year?
Yeah, if I went wide receiver, wide receiver, wide receiver.
Okay.
Because I'm getting him as my fourth player,
right,
4th or 5th player. So yeah, if you're going heavy wide receiver, you're kind of going more like the kind of zero. No one ever really goes zero, by the way. That's a huge exaggeration with the zero RB thing. But if you're going 3 wide receivers and then a running back, yeah, I mean he's a perfect example of someone that you want.
I go zero everything. I just don't draft for the first 6.
Yeah. Whenever people are like I do zero, I'm like no, you don't.
I'll pick him up off waivers.
Right.
I don't know. For me, Rawls, there's a little bit too much smoke here, though. Serious injury, right, and no timetable for return. Team drafting 3 running backs in the draft. Rawls not drafted last year, by the way. And then on top of it, you look, he only had 5 games of production, right? So that's what the kids call a small sample size. I don't know if we can necessarily really trust Thomas Rawls. Now, Brandon, again, like we said earlier, though, you get him at a value. At this point, get him in the 4th round with the potential ceiling. That makes sense because he was going in the 2nd round, 2 months ago for all of us loonies who were drafting then. But you get him at a value, but I just have some concerns. And you know what I'm seeing? CJ Prosise, his ADP keeps creeping up. I think we're going to see that trend all the way through the end of August.
But I feel like I think CJ Prosise's ADP is getting too high for me not knowing what's going to happen with them. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like he's such a pass catching back, and I have not seen Seattle's defense or their offense really rally around a pass catching back to the point where I would feel comfortable with thinking that their offense is going to do that. It's kind of like Jimmy, Graham last year. I was like, they don't use tight ends like that. This doesn't make sense to me. So I'm still having a tough time seeing it. Preseason, I may change my mind, but right now I'm a little bit, I don't know. Am I wrong?
Well, they didn't really have to worry about a pass catching back because Marshawn Lynch did everything. Marshawn Lynch was awesome.
Oh, he was amazing. Awesome. Oh, his elusive score from back in the day. Oh.
Yeah, and we always one of the most elusive players, was the most elusive last year in the shortened season that he played. So they didn't have to worry about that. Prosise, though, we're going to have, here's a little teaser of some content coming out, hopefully maybe tomorrow on Pro Football Focus. We had a mock draft with mostly staffers and a few folks from a couple other sites in the industry. And I don't remember where Prosise went, but I know it was quite early. And it was one of those where I was like, that's pretty interesting. So we'll definitely talk about that in the column. So check that out there. But, yeah, this Rawls thing, it's not – until we get a conclusive answer, it's not going to go away. And Brandon, like you said earlier, sometimes news like this, Sammy Watkins, Thomas Rawls, pushes these guys' ADPs down to a range where now you get them at a value, and it's just smart drafting.
Mm-hmm.
All right, moving on, and we are quickly coming to the end of this list. So 35, Jordan Reed, 34, C.J. Anderson, followed by Julian Edelman, Randall Cobb, Carlos Hyde, LaShawn McCoy, T.Y. Hilton, Demaryius Thomas, Brandon Cooks, Eddie Lacy, Brandon Marshall, Doug Martin, Mark Ingram, Sammy Watkins, and Amari Cooper. So, Mike, for you, who is too high on that part of the list?
I'm going to chime in, and I know it's totally unexpected by anybody listening, would be Jordan Reed. I'm fading Jordan Reed quite a bit, actually. He's not my number 2 tight end like everybody else's. When you look at this guy, he caught 10 touchdowns on 111 targets last year. And his previous 125 targets of his career, he caught 3. Now, if you're hinging on the fact that Kirk Cousins is all of a sudden the next coming of Aaron Rodgers, okay, I guess you have an argument. But when you look at the fact that Deshaun Jackson was hurt an entire year, you look at Pierre Garçon, who is no longer good at this point in his career. Jamison Crowder's coming up, and I know he's not a touchdown guy. He's that slot guy. The signing of Doxson. We talked about Matt Jones. This team didn't score any touchdowns via the run last year, outside of quarterback touchdowns. It was the perfect storm for Jordan Reed last year. And we haven't even mentioned the fact that the guy's been hurt his entire career. I mean, when healthy, we know he's a great player. But the thing is, he's never really been healthy for an entire season, on top of the fact that all these other factors kind of coming into play. I am not touching Jordan Reed at his current ADP. I believe it sits in the 3rd round.
Played 14 games last year, though. And, hey, we don't need him to be the next Aaron Rodgers. We need Kirk Cousins to be the next Andy Dalton in that offense. That's all I want out of him. That's all I want out of him. I don't need him to be an all-time great. I just want him to put up numbers. And when we run the projections, his numbers, I have to throttle him back every time because the numbers really love him in that offense. You're definitely alone on an island with Jordan Reed, but more power to you with that one.
Did the projections have 16 games for him, Jeff?
For Jordan Reed or for Cousins?
No, for Reed.
Oh, it's Cousins who I have to throttle back.
Okay.
Reed falls in that he's because of his ceiling falls below Gronkowski, but ahead of Olsen, who doesn't necessarily have the ceiling. But Olsen has a super high floor. You know, you can't say the same thing about Reed.
Right. All right, so let's just wrap this baby up. We will do the top 20 of our PFF Fantasy 101. We've got Jamal Charles and Keenan Allen tied at 19, Mike Evans, Alshon Jeffrey, Jordy Nelson, Adrian Peterson, Devontae Freeman, Allen Robinson, Lamar Miller, David Johnson, and then your top 10, A.J. Green, Des Bryant, Rob Gronkowski, Ezekiel Elliott at 7. Wow, that's another one. DeAndre Hopkins, Todd Gurley, and then a tie with Odell Beckham and Le'Veon Bell at 3, Julio Jones at 2, and our number 1 player, Antonio Brown. So, Brandon, who is too high on that list?
Too high. Ooh,
This is Hot Take Central, so.
Hot Take Central. I don't like that Des Bryant's entire career is tied to Tony Romo and his clavicle. They only won 1 game without Tony Romo last year. Des Bryant, if you look at his Pro Football Focus grade, it was in the toilet, and it wasn't just the bad quarterbacking. It was also him. He had some issues. There's no getting around it. So, I'm a little bit concerned with that. I mean, I think it's funny to hear you groan about Jordy Nelson, but I do want to say, if you can get Jamal Charles in the 3rd round, congratulations. You got a workhorse back in the Kansas City offense, and all they do is run. So you know what? You handcuff. I don't tell people to do that often, but you handcuff and you feel good about yourself.
And look, if there's anyone that can come back from major knee surgeries a couple times, it's Jamal Charles. So, Mike, what about you? Who's too high for the top 20?
Too high for the top 20? Man, it's tough for me to say this, but I'm going to go DeAndre Hopkins. I know that he was a target hog last year, and as the year went on a little bit, they started to dial it back just a tad. Now, it's not saying that DeAndre Hopkins isn't going to be a wide receiver 1, but when you're talking about him as like the number 5, number 6 player, you're talking about the elites. These guys are untouchable. Now, DeAndre Hopkins, I know he got a new quarterback, but I don't think it was an upgrade. I don't think Osweiler is any better than Brian Hoyer, and I don't think that that's a hot take or anything like that. I think that's the truth. When we graded last year at PFF, we actually graded Hoyer as a better quarterback. So when you add in the fact that you have a healthy Jalen Strong if he's not suspended, they went out and drafted Will Fuller, Braxton Miller, Lamar Miller. They're going to run the ball a hell of a lot. I'm excited about Lamar Miller. He's one that I would actually move up the list. But DeAndre Hopkins, there's guys like A.J. Green, Des Bryant, who I would probably take over DeAndre Hopkins at this point.
Jeff, since you are the boss, you can tell us who's a good value in the top 20 here. Take us home.
Take us home. No pressure. Devontae Freeman, I think people need to catch up with how good this guy is as a football player. And when we look at running backs, 3-down players are few and far between in the league right now. Freeman is one of those guys. He's an excellent receiver. He was one of just 3 running backs targeted 90 times last year. The other 2, Theo Riddick and Danny Woodhead, who were really just exclusively receiving running backs. Freeman wasn't that. And we saw Coleman flash briefly, but he also struggled mightily at times. I think we still see Freeman in that feature role with Coleman spelling him. I think he's a great value. You can get him a little bit later on. And you know, for me, we have Freeman ranked 14. We have Todd Gurley ranked 5. I have Freeman ahead of Todd Gurley, and I'm completely confident in that when opposing defenses know that all these carries are going to go to Todd Gurley, they're going to key in on him, and that offense is not good enough to really counterpunch whatsoever with what they have in place with either Case Keenum or Jared Goff under center. So for me, Freeman, I think he's the best value in that top 20 there.
Alrighty then. Well, on that note, Jeffrey, we will end this edition of the Fantasy Slant. I challenge any other podcast to go through as many players as we just did in one episode. So, for my fellow PFF fantasy analysts, I'm your host, Michael Moore, and we will see you on the next edition of the Fantasy Slant.